Hi. When I was growing up in Europe, I was exposed to different kinds of food. We lived in England and France and in Arabia. And, I really enjoyed trying the different kinds of foods. Um, in France, they had wonderful sauces. In England, it was a little bit more unadorned, but I liked that as a child. And the interesting thing is, my family is a vegetarian. And in many of these countries, they had some meat, ate lots of meat, and potatoes. And one time I went to Mexico, and in Mexico, I actually ate a taco that was beef, unknowingly actually, and ate cow brains. And that was a bit of a shock. It was very surprising that they would eat that, and that I ate it, being a vegetarian. So I'm wondering if you could think about something from your life that was surprising or not, and when you visited other countries or came in contact with other cultures, what was surprising and what was just interesting and interesting information about that country. Sometimes we want to express cultural surprises. We also want to express what we learned that is not surprising. So I'm going to take you through a few ways to do that, using different types of words that express and alert us to a comparison where the information is a little different, but not particularly surprising. In other words, that alert us to something that is quite different and surprising. So we're going to begin with a couple of words that are but and yet, and these are in the family of conjunctions. And so I'll give you some examples. In France, most women combine full-time work with family responsibilities. When I traveled around the world, living in different countries, I did notice that women were participating in society in different and similar ways. So these are some of the things that I also researched a little bit, but also was aware of. In the UK, most women work part-time and raise families. So we would use the but to connect these two ideas because they are similar, but ever a little different. In France, most women combine full-time work with family responsibilities, but in the UK, most women work part-time and raise families. And when we use a conjunction, we have to remember to put a comma before the conjunction. Another time, I went to Saudi Arabia and was aware that women were not particularly present physically in public spaces, that they were much more tied to the home. And in Saudi Arabia, only 21% of women work. I think this is changing and women are starting to work more. Yet, in the United States, 75% of mothers are in the labor force. So that's quite a difference, a cultural difference. So another way that we can express similarity and differences is with while and even though. And these are subordinators. They connect a complex sentence, the two clauses of a complex sentence. So dinner, the time that people eat dinner varies in different countries, and in some countries it's about the same time. In France, dinner is at 7 or 8 p.m. And in the UK, they have tea time, which I personally loved, and my family carried that into our life in the United States. But tea time was at 4, so they eat a little more on the later end of France's time frame. So in France, dinner is at 7 to 8 p.m., while in the UK, with tea time, dinner is usually about 8 p.m. So we can put subordinators at the beginning of a sentence or in the second half of the sentence. And so if the subordinator clause is in the front end of the sentence, we need to have a comma after that clause before the independent clause. And in the U.S., we eat earlier. I know my father would come home from work when I was growing up, and we would want to eat immediately. So in the United States, people typically eat from 5 to 7. And it surprised me very much that in Spain, dinner time starts as late as 10:30 p.m. Because they take a time to rest. They also, in Spain, have kind of a tea time as well, and they eat later, much later, significantly later than in the United States, and that surprised me. So in this case, we've used the word even though to connect those two clauses. Another method, grammatical method to talk about surprising and not surprising things that we learn about other cultures are transition words. And so, as I mentioned in the beginning, my story about eating different kinds of food and being surprised in Mexico. So we'll look at that now in a written form. So in France, people enjoy eating potatoes, French bread, fish and chicken with delicious sauces. They have wonderful sauces. However, in England, people primarily eat potatoes with butter, beef, and chicken. So we have to remember in this case, when we use a transition word, that if it appears in the after the first independent clause, that we would have a semicolon, the word however, and a comma, and then the other information. And I did mention earlier that my family are vegetarians and that I travel to Mexico and have been there quite a bit. And on one of my visits, I enjoyed eating unexpectedly beef tacos, and in Mexico there's wonderful chicken and rice, and I accidentally ate cow brains. So that was a surprise, big surprise to me. I didn't know that was on their cuisine. So in this case, I would use the word nevertheless. My family in the United States are vegetarians. Nevertheless, in Mexico, people eat beef, chicken, and rice, and I accidentally ate cow brains. So in this case, you can also have a transition word that begins the second sentence. You would have a period after the first sentence, and then, nevertheless, followed by a comma, begins the second sentence. So we're in review. Conjunctions, but and yet, expresses, similar information. It can be a little different, but it doesn't particularly surprise us, and yet is indicating surprise. And subordinators, we have while and even though, and transition words of nevertheless and however, with nevertheless being alerting us to a surprise. And even though alerts us to a surprise in with subordinators. So I have two groups of two sets of sentences for you to look at. And I'd like you to use a conjunction, a subordinator or transition word, and use two different of those categories to link these sentences. And think about which statement is combination has a statement that is surprising when you select your word. So I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. So here are some examples. I'm sure you came up with some good sentences, but just to, here are some examples that I have finished and will share with you. And you can take a look and see if it compares. And you can also go through the set of slides and compare your sentences to the ones that, examples that were given in this presentation to see if your punctuation is correct and your use of the vocabulary is correct. So people throughout Europe use public transportation. Nevertheless, in the United States, people travel independently in private cars. So that's quite different. We are very independent. We don't have a prevailing mass transit system the way Europe does. And I'm sure that's surprising to people that come to this country. While people in England primarily eat potatoes, butter, beef, and chicken, in France, people enjoy eating potatoes, fish, chicken with delicious sauces. Remember the comma after the first clause. And now that you are getting the hang of this, and I would like you to write a short comparison contrast essay about some aspect of American or other culture which was different from your own, including something that was surprising. And I hope you enjoy this assignment.